If you really want to understand how music works, you want to understand one of the most basic building blocks of music in Western music, that is something called the half step. So the half step is the smallest possible distance that we can have between two notes. Really quick aside on this, we're talking about Western music. There are smaller distances between notes in other parts of the world, especially in Middle Eastern music and Asian music. Super cool stuff. Also in Western music, there are composers experimenting with what we call microtones, and that's tones that are in between the half step. Very interesting sounds. Definitely check it out. So I'm here at the piano. If you pick any key on the piano, right? Say I pick this one. Okay, a half step is simply the distance between this note and the very next note on the keyboard, including all of the black or white keys. So in this case, I go from this note to the very next note. I'm going to go up. This black key right here is a half step away. I can also go a half step down. If I'm on the same note, I can go down to the very next note. That's called a half step. If you're wondering how you can call up the sound of the half step anytime you want, we have the immortal John Williams to thank for the theme to Jaws. If you hear that, that's a half step. So that's a sound that you have in your head. You're probably carrying it around with you already. You already know what a half step sounds like. So that is the smallest possible distance that we can have between two notes in our system of music. Now, we can then use the half step to build all kinds of other things. So the easiest of those is if I put two half steps together, I get what's called a whole step. So if I take that same example that I started with, this is a D note on the piano, and I go up a half step to this black key right here. So that's D sharp or E flat, and I go up another half step to this E right here. That's an E. So the distance from this D note to this E note is two half steps or one whole step. Now, once you understand how half steps and whole steps work, we can use those to build all kinds of other structures that are really useful for us in understanding music. You can use them to build scales. You can then use scales to write melodies or understand other authors' melodies. You can then use those scales to create chords that'll accompany the melodies or understand the chord progressions of other composers and songwriters. So that half step is the basic building block that we can then use to build whole steps, scales, chords, songs, so many of the other things that we see every day in music.